Welcome to the Blooms and Barnacles podcast, where we talk about everything related to Oscar Wilde, a very special edition of the Blooms and Barnacles Patreon. We will talk about James Joyce, actually, but our topic today is The Picture of Dorian Gray by one Oscar Wilde. I don't have all of his names memorized, so we're going to talk Oscar Wilde today, Dorian Gray specifically. Kind of our arrangement today is, since it's a novel, I read the novel. Dermot has not read the novel, but we did watch a film version of it.
As good as.
Anyone who's ever forgotten to write a book report until the night before knows is good enough. Just watch the movie version. So we'll talk about that a bit, if the spirit moves you, Dermot. But mostly we're going to be talking about the book. We'll do our usual shtick, analyze it to death, and compare it to Ulysses, and see where it takes us.
Yep.
I have to say, I've wanted to do this episode for quite some time. My history with the novel is I read it, years ago, maybe 10 or more years ago, and I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it. I always felt like I enjoyed the beginning parts where it seems like kind of a love triangle between three men, and then once it gets into the horror element of Dorian Gray's picture, my interest started to flag, and I would say that's kind of my experience reading it again.
Yeah.
My first point in my outline here is called Tilting at Straw Men, because I have a bone to pick with the world, and specifically with people on Facebook. I have, at various points in my life, as a person who's interested in literature, gotten into conversations about Oscar Wilde, either online, in response to my own work on Blooms and Barnacles, sometimes just with talking to friends. I've come across this point of view again and again. It's that Oscar Wilde wasn't gay, actually. Now, would you like to respond to that comment? Because I have a few things to say about it.
What planet are you living on?
I'd say one thrust of it is that, and this is germane to what we'll talk about, is that gay identity didn't exist in his lifetime as it exists now. That's a fair bit of nuance to add, but I personally feel that it is irrelevant to the life story and to the work of Oscar Wilde, who was a man who loved other men, regardless of what terms he used to identify himself as a human being. That was an aspect of his life and an aspect of his death, ultimately. And it's certainly an aspect of Dorian Gray, as we will get into.
Same comments made about classical Europe, also the Islamic world, that it didn't exist as an identity as we have it now, but actions very certainly were gay or straight. And in classical Rome, there was no shame in homosexual sex, but there was shame in being the receiving partner and having the female position. But if you were the male, then that was fine.
Hey, remember our agreement? I'm the man.
You're the man!
And there's I think Suetonius in the 12 Caesars has a great story of Julius Caesar had made friends with some other king and was spending a lot of time with them, and clearly there was something going on. So this diplomat or whatever goes in to greet King What's-His-Face and Caesar. There's the king on the throne, Caesar by his side, and he salutes the king and says, "King," and then he salutes Caesar, "Queen."
Okay.
These kind of stories go back to the original periods. People well understood certain actions were certain actions. There was no confusion over that. The British legal system had no confusion in sending him to jail. Granted, there might have been other factors in, but it was because of the libel, being accused of homosexual sex.
Which was incredibly illegal in the 1890s in Britain.
Right.
Look, I'm going to say this to you, my patrons. This is just between us. Because we talk about queer issues on Blooms and Barnacles from time to time, because I do think it's part of the fabric of Ulysses. And if it's a book about everything, it's also about that, because that is part of everything. And I've found those tend to be my rare controversial topics that I cover, is anything to do with, same-sex relations or, queer relationships in Ulysses, or where they are or they aren't. I found I would get blowback on that when I posted, not in the Blooms and Barnacles Facebook group, but in other Ulysses groups on Facebook, and I've stopped posting those just because I don't like being on Facebook, basically, and not to do with those groups. I just don't like Facebook, but I don't get those emails or comments anymore, so I think there's possibly a connection there. But I got one in particular that was long and angry on my personal page about how dare I accuse Oscar Wilde of being a pederast, and all those young men were just very close friends, and I don't agree with that.
Well, they weren't underage, were they?
No, and this is something I've been wondering about the term pederasty, which I tend to read as an adult and a child, maybe a teenage child, but still someone who's too young. But I wonder, Oscar Wilde he had an interest in, what he would term like an ephebic relationship or a Greek relationship where there is an older man and a